Well, thank you everyone for joining this evening. This is our very first meeting in 2022. So thank you for joining this evening. Our president, Barbara, may end up joining the meeting a little bit late, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started as your sergeant at arms. If you would all please stand and follow my voice, and hold on a second as I share my screen.
And mute yourselves.
And please mute yourselves so that we don't have an issue with that, and follow my voice. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. We don't have our Toastmaster this evening, so I will also be acting as your Toastmaster unless Steve Schwinn shows up a little bit late. I would now like to introduce any guests that we have. We do have one guest this evening. Dawn, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. However, Dawn Jensen Nobile is joining us for the very first time. Dawn, I don't know where you're from. Are you actually here in Wenatchee?
I have been in Wenatchee for 3 years. I lived in Oregon 9 years before that.
Wonderful. And you're brand new to Toastmasters.
I am. Brand
Wonderful.
new.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. It's a great group. We are an easygoing group, and I think you're going to love being a participant, and ultimately, perhaps you'll want to join our club as a member too. So thank you for joining us this evening. At this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to, actually, I guess we need to talk about any changes to the agenda, and perhaps someone in the audience might have a joke for the evening. If you do have a joke, please raise your hand. Jacob, I'm going to let you start with the joke of the day.
All right, this is actually one of my favorite jokes, and I've been waiting to share it with some of you guys. Julius Caesar walks into a bar, and the bartender says, "What shall you have?" And he says, "I'd like a Martinez." And the bartender looks at him and says, "Do you mean a martini?" And Julius Caesar says, "If I wanted a double, I'd ask for one." A little Latin joke for you guys today. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Jacob. We do have a few agenda changes. Wanted to let you know that Selena could not make it this evening, so I will be filling in as the timer. Pat has graciously offered to assume the role of awe counter. We do not yet have Steve here, who is our Toastmaster, so temporarily I'm filling in as Toastmaster.
Rob, I just emailed you my intro.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
At this moment, I would like to turn it over to our general evaluator. Please welcome Kathleen McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, etc. My role as general evaluator is to take a comprehensive view of the meeting as a whole, everything from what time we start through how each of us perform our roles to whether we end on time. The idea is to provide constructive feedback on areas where we could improve. After all, we could all improve. I couldn't do this alone. I have a polished team who is joining me, and to see if I get everyone's name right as I've just made the notes about the changes. I would like to introduce those members of the team so they can describe their roles. First up is our evaluator, Vicki Chatterton. Vicki.
Thank you, General Evaluator. This evening, I will be evaluating Lloyd's speech. He is working on a level 4 project, and this is in the innovative planning path. And this project is a question and answer project. So he will give a speech for about 5 to 6 minutes, I believe. And then he will follow up with a question and answer session. So while you're listening to his speech, be thinking about maybe a question that you would like to ask him about that. He will be fielding questions for about 15 minutes. And then at the end of our meeting during the evaluation portion, again, I will give my thoughts about his speech. Back to you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Madam Evaluator. May I ask Madam Evaluator a follow-up question? And this may be for you or for Lloyd, which is, do you want the question and answer period to be, I don't know if the right word is aggressive, Lloyd? Is this something where we're supposed to throw some curveballs at you? Or is this a real, just general, genuine discussion?
Whatever makes you happy.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. I am going to move on and introduce our timer. Rob Tidd is standing in as our timer. Mr. Vegetable Man, explain your role to us.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. This evening, my role as timer is to help keep people on track. When we give speeches, it's important that speeches fall within a prescribed timeline. Otherwise, people will end up talking longer than they should, and we don't want that to happen. So my role is to help assist those who are making speeches to fall within the prescribed timeline. This evening, we have one speaker, Lloyd Smith. We're going to break it into two parts. The first part will be his speech, which will be for 5 minutes. What I will do at 3 minutes is present the green vegetables. At 4 minutes, the yellow, and at 5 minutes, the tomatoes. He is also going to have a 15-minute Q&A. So what I will do is, Lloyd, tell me if this is appropriate for you. We will do the green at 13 minutes, the yellow at 14 minutes, and the red at 15 minutes.
Sure, sounds good, Rob. Rob, if the speech goes a little more than 5, then cut off the Q&A. The whole thing should not be any longer than 20.
Understood. Thank you, Lloyd. We also have table topics this evening. Fan favorite for everyone. And I know that it's going to be a wonderful theme tonight, Jacob. So the table topics are a maximum of 2 minutes. What we do is at 1 minute, I will present the green. At 1.5, the yellow. And at 2, I will present the red. And I will report at the end of the meeting how everyone did to meet those time constraints. Back to you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Mr. Grammarian. Whoops, Mr. Timer, excuse me. We won't give you yet another role. You have enough. Now I would like to introduce our grammarian. Serving in that role tonight is Fabiola Barbosa. Welcome. Tell us about your role.
Good evening, Madam General Evaluator and Toastmasters and guests. As my responsibility this evening is to pay close attention to all speakers, listen carefully to their language usage. I'll be taking notes of improper language, as well as any outstanding words, quotes, sayings, or thoughts. In my position, I will introduce also the word of the day, which is, 1 minute here. Where'd it go? Clamped, which means overcome with emotion. An example of this word is she was all verklempt earlier this week over her latest split from her husband. Therefore, our word this week or today is verklempt. At the end of this evening, I will then provide a report and on the usage of the words, and then also of the improper language. Thank you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Madam Grammarian. That is going to be a challenging word for verklempt. Thank you. Counter. We are delighted to have Pat Whitfield step into that role, which had belonged to Rob Tidd. Pat, you want to tell us about your role as counter?
I'll be the one watching for all these filler words that disrupt the flow of language. But, and so, and so on, and so on, and so on, and repeats. And hopefully the language will flow and I'll not find a single flaw at all. That's my job. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Counter. I'm sure we'll be absolutely clean tonight. A verklempt performance. Doing my best here. That is all I have for right now. I will be back later. I'm going to turn the meeting back to our temporary interim Toastmaster. Am I right? Rob, back to you.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Mark Twain once famously said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." Anyone who looks at Facebook knows exactly what he meant. Every single day we see posts that are, frankly, ignorant. One such post that we often see in various forms says something like this: if you think it's time to allow God back into the schools, like and share this. Those posts are inspired by a 1962 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Engel versus Vitale, which held that officially sponsored prayers in the public schools violated the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It's a simple, very clear decision, but it has been misunderstood, misinterpreted, and lied about since the day that it was issued. This evening, Lloyd Smith will be presenting the question and answer session Pathways Project, which is an elective in level 4 of his innovative planning path. He will look at the issue from a different perspective. What religious activities are not only allowed, but are constitutionally protected in the public schools? There will be a question and answer session following the speech. Lloyd Smith and religious expression in the schools. Religious expression in the schools by Lloyd Smith.
Thank you, Rob. I think most of you have seen posts that are similar to the one that Rob mentioned. I saw 2 of them this morning when I looked at what was going on in Facebook. It's really an odd thing because the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment of the Constitution are what guarantee us freedom of religion. There's nothing in them that prohibits religion, whatever, it just limits it, limits what the government can do in connection with religion. The amendment reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." All it means is that the religions can't influence the government and the government can't control religions. It's no big deal. But there were 2 Supreme Court decisions that caused a lot of confusion. As Rob mentioned, one of them was the 1962 Engel versus Vitale decision. The court ruled on a case about mandatory prayer in the school, government written prayers. And they ruled that that was unconstitutional because it violated the Establishment Clause. The court said that just promoting religion is sufficient to establish a violation, even if the promotion is not coercive. In other words, you couldn't have a voluntary prayer that was written by school officials. But then later on in 1969, in a different case, Tinker versus Des Moines, the Supreme Court ruled that neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. But what that seemed to imply was that anybody could say or do what they wanted, except in the case of religion. And that spawned a lot of these notions that somehow God had been removed from the public schools. That wasn't the case at all. And later on in 1996, President Clinton ordered the Department of Education to clarify the situation. What he was trying to do was to stop all of these lawsuits that were costing everybody a lot of time and effort and money. So the federal law, really important federal law called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has been amended many, many times, was amended again to require the Secretary of Education to issue guidance to state and local education agencies. And it contains several specific things, about 13 of them. I want to talk about 3 of them that seem to be the focus of everybody's attention. First of all, can kids pray during school? Well, there's an old joke that says as long as there's algebra, there is going to be prayer in the public schools. And that may be correct. But the answer to that question is an unequivocal yes. Students can pray, say grace, read their Bibles, study religious materials with other students, really anything they want during non-instructional time. I've personally watched kids do that during the years when I was teaching at Eastmont High School. And the only thing they cannot do is to do those things during class time. So the schools are required to be neutral is what it amounts to. A second thing that comes up a lot is, can the kids express religious views or opinions or religious content in their assignments? And the answer is yes. Students may express religious themes in their homework, artwork, music, written and oral assignments, just as they want. Teachers are required to assess those assignments according to the regular standards they apply to all of the assignments. That includes relevance, though. But in any event, yes, kids can express religious views anytime they want. Finally, what about teaching about religion? I had several parents tell me at various times that I could not talk about religion in school. The answer is sure I could when I was teaching. The schools can't provide religious instruction, but they can teach about religion in the context of courses in history, literature, music, art, and whatnot. In fact, if you think about it for a moment, it would be pretty much impossible to teach history or literature without any reference to religion because of the influence religions had on both of those subjects through the years. The point of this is that that God has not been removed from the schools at all. Kids are free to believe as they choose. They're free to express themselves in religious ways if they want. The only thing they cannot do is to disrupt or materially disrupt the course of the educational program when they're doing that. So all of these posts you see about returning God to the public school are in a range between ignorant and just plain dishonest. A lot of times these are attached to fundraising, especially for conservative political causes. But if you're worried about God in the public schools, you don't have to be. He was never removed and is still there. So now, if anybody has any questions, this would be a really good time. Yes, Jacob.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, Lloyd. My question pertains to religions that aren't Catholic or Christian based. It's Muslim based. And the point I wanted to clarify was disruption in the classroom. So if your religious doctrine, which Muslims, you pray 5 times a day, and occasionally that does align during class time, how would an instructor going about trying to remain neutral, allow that disruption to happen, but also acknowledging that it is a disruption in the classroom?
One of the provisions in the set of guidelines is called accommodating prayer during instructional time. And it says that the schools may dismiss students to an off-premise religious instruction or whatever, or to allow them to pray and that sort of thing. In other words, the kid could leave the room to do it and then come back. But what the schools cannot do is prohibit the kid from exercising his religion. So they've kind of split the difference is what it amounts to. And as you've said in your question. Did that answer it, Jacob?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, thank you, it did.
Okay. Yes, Kathleen.
What about objects, religious objects that you read about that people might have, the Ten Commandments in some kind of a sculpture or something, and that has to be removed?
Now you mean,
How do those kind of things fit in?
okay, you mean like the school has it, like a plaque on a wall or something like that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, those are not allowed because they would be promoting a religion. What the guidelines say basically is that the schools may not promote or discourage or mandate anything dealing with religion. And the posting of the commandments is obviously a Jewish or Christian expression of religion, so it would not be allowed. Now, can a kid have that, like say on his notebook or something? Sure. They can wear a shirt with the 10 Commandments on it if they want. The basic rule about religious attire is that anything that would be normally acceptable in a non-religious context has to be accepted. In other words, if the school allows kids to wear shirts with logos on them, for example, brand name logos or slogans or whatever, then they have to allow religious slogans as well. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Vicki.
For these people that are reading this on Facebook and then take it up upon themselves to have a protest or a sit-in, how do you think the schools should handle that? Do you think that they are handling it in a positive way, or do you think that it's becoming disruptive by all this misinformation?
So you mean like a non-student protest or even a student protest?
The
something
students, like the students get this information, and so all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, we need to, become aware of, make the school become aware of this.
Oh, okay.
Type of thing.
That's actually covered by that second Supreme Court decision I mentioned, Tinker versus Des Moines. That was ruled during the Vietnam era when some kids in a school district in Iowa were expelled for wearing black armbands protesting the Vietnam War. And the court ruled that could not be done. It was an example of First Amendment expression. So demonstrations are allowed unless they materially disrupt the educational process. So could a bunch of kids sit down in the hall and start yelling or something? The answer is no. That would be a material disruption of the educational process. But could they have a demonstration per se? The answer is yes, if other demonstrations are also allowed. Now, if I misinterpreted you first, I thought you were talking about like a group of community members or something coming into the school. That would absolutely not be allowed. That's a really tricky security issue. The schools don't allow outsiders in the doors anymore at all.
Thank you.
Yes, Kathleen.
I didn't pay enough attention to the dates that you mentioned for the Supreme Court decisions. Is this a very stable situation? The Supreme Court decisions were made years and years ago and they're not being challenged anymore? Or is this something that it could be on the docket in the next year or two because there are cases working their way through? Are you aware of any of that?
It's highly unlikely. The first decision was made in 1962 and the second one in 1969. The 69 decision, Tinker versus Des Moines, case did reach the Supreme Court last session about that. Some girl, I can't remember where she was, but anyway, she didn't get onto the cheerleading squad, posted a obscene rant about the advisor and the school on her private Facebook account outside of school hours. And the school tried to discipline her for that. And the court said, sorry, that's an expression of free speech. And she couldn't be disciplined. She could have been disciplined had she done it in school, but not outside of school. So the answer to the question is yes, those decisions are precedent. The school prayer one, I know about once every 2 or 3 years, the case starts working its way up and the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court, just brushes it aside by saying they've already dealt with that. Yeah, Pat?
What about the insertion of under God, one nation under God? I know back when I was a very young child and during the rare time I went to public schools, it was one nation indivisible. And then later it became one nation under God. any controversy arisen about that in the past or looking like it might?
Well, not to date you, but that happened in 1954. And that actually was done as a response to the alleged dangers of godless communism. See, by making all the Americans say under God, then that protected us from the communist cooties or boogeyman or whatever. But in terms of the schools, no. The courts have ruled separately about that it's kids cannot be compelled to say the Pledge of Allegiance. They have to remain silent and respectful. They don't have to stand, they don't have to say it, but they can't disrupt it either. And I have had students in the past who simply did not say the part about under God. You know, they'd say the rest of it, but not that part. But there again, that's a matter of expression. Again, the issue is whether it materially disrupts the instructional program. So a kid who made a big deal out of it or, you know, yelled during it or something, that he could be disciplined, but not if he just stood and didn't do it. Anybody else? How are we doing for time, Rob?
We just hit the 7.5 minute mark.
Okay. Come on, dream up some questions, people. I did my part. Now you got to do yours.
I have another question.
Sure, Jacob.
So in this, for the sake of protecting religion, but keeping it separate from school institutions and the school maintaining a neutral status, how does that translate over to private schools and or Catholic schools versus a public education?
Not at all. Those are not public schools. All of this only applies to the public schools. The idea, for example, the existence of parochial schools, like say Catholic schools or whatever, that's an aspect of the religion. The church has set up those schools, and so they can do whatever rules they want. And as far as I know, those schools do teach religion itself. Many of them have mandatory prayer and so on, but that's their business. They once again, the government cannot interfere with that. All of this applies only to schools that are getting money through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act.
Okay, so because it's considered an elective outside of general education, the rules don't apply to them.
That's correct.
In this circumstance.
That's
okay.
correct. You know, you got to remember, public school attendance is compulsory. It's mandatory in all the states, whereas private school attendance is not. And so obviously people who disapprove of whatever a private school is doing could simply quit.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for answering my question.
Barbara, you look eager to have a question. What was it?
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
Because I was recently, I saw an article regarding funding in some states. They're trying that it's at the Supreme Court that they're going to cut off funding to private religious schools, government funding.
It's actually the other way around. I can't remember what state it is. North Dakota, I think it's an unlikely one. Anyway, the idea is that the schools, the state legislature passed a law allowing kids in the religious schools to be funded as if they were in the public schools. So the question is whether or not that violates the Establishment Clause. It's hard to tell what that ruling is going to be because the Supreme Court has changed so much in the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you.
Somebody, okay, Brian, you're it. You got to have a question. You have a big grin on your face.
I'm doing my best at trying to think, Lloyd, but your speech was done so well that you covered the questions pretty much.
You're stunned by my brilliance, eh?
Again.
Yeah, you don't have to brown nose me. You're not a student anymore.
I'm thinking of the same thing. I really appreciate all your answers. This is very informative, and you are you're just knowledgeable in so many different aspects of this. We haven't, somebody's got to throw them. Come on.
Unless I'm faking. Yeah, okay, go ahead, Fabiola. You can do it.
I don't know how to phrase a question, but I'm curious to know when you were mentioning about attire, that's appropriate and acceptable to wear with some of the gang affiliations, crosses are something that are very common to wear. And so how can they make that distinction within the schools of whether it's attire for religious purposes or attire for other affiliations?
They can't. So I'm glad I could answer. No, I actually, that is a huge problem. You know, every year at the start of the year, at every school, they have these little sessions. Usually a cop comes in and explains the, you know, the various kinds of things you're supposed to look for in terms of gang affiliation. You know, how kids wear their belts and the colors they wear and hats and all kinds of stuff like that. And you're supposed to watch for that. But those things that have, you know, a lot of the gangsters are not stupid people. And so they've edged over into some of these other symbols. As you say, the cross is one of them. Whenever that's come up, generally speaking, the schools and the courts have erred to the side of allowing it, because there's no way to know whether or not the kid is, you know, a devout Christian or some kind of gangbanger. You know, there just isn't. One exception to that, there was a kid somewhere, I can't remember where he was, but he was a Sikh, you know, the Indian kind of minority religion. And they have this ceremonial dagger thing that they typically wear. And this kid showed up at school with one of these daggers. Well, that raises an issue. And so they bounced him out. It got into the courts and this lawsuit died. I think the parents finally realized, wait a minute, I understand why they don't want a kid with a big knife in school. But that would be an interesting one to see go all the way through the courts. But it's a tricky issue. You know, what do you do? In a way, this will sound trivial. It's really not. In a way, it's like certain gangs use professional football attire, like the LA Raiders is a common one. Well, on the other hand, there are kids who are LA Raider fans, and other kids are wearing other jerseys. So how do you tell a guy with the LA Raider t-shirt that he can't wear it, whereas a kid with the 49ers t-shirt can? It's just a constant hassle when you get right down to it. Okay, any other questions, or have we hit the end of the road? Okay, thank you all very much. I'll turn it back over to our Toastmaster, Rob.
Thank you, Lloyd. I would like everybody to take a minute, and if you would put your question, actually put your comments about Lloyd's presentation in the chat box, that would be much appreciated, and I will start that 1 minute now.
I should mention, if you would like a copy of the actual set of guidelines, it's called, which you probably can't read here anyway, constitutionally, what is it? Guidance on constitutionally protected prayer and religious expression in public, elementary and secondary schools. If you put your name in the chat box, I'll send you the link to where you can get that and print your own copy. It has the entire set of guidelines, including reference notes and whatnot.
Thank you, Lloyd. That is 1 minute. I thought I would be all verklempt with all these different roles I'm doing this evening, but I hopefully am doing an okay, adequate job bouncing from one to the other. I would like to take this moment to introduce our table topics master this evening. This is his first time doing it, so I'm anxious to see what questions Jacobs is going to present to us tonight. So please welcome our table topics master for this evening, Jacob Town.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Toastmaster. It is, in fact, my first time doing table topics, and it has been quite challenging to figure out what kind of questions to ask, especially when our topic is New Year's resolutions. Because the normal go-to would be to ask you guys what your New Year's resolutions are. But I found that that was not quite encompassing enough for what the new year reflects. New Year's, the new year is a cycle of rebirth. You get to be a new version of yourself, or you get to work on an old version of yourself. And so the questions I have gathered today, I have them on my phone, so excuse me if I start reading them, are supposed to let you reflect on your past year and what you want to work on coming into the year. And so that is the direction I went with my questions today. I'd also like to ask Dawn, would you like to answer a question today?
I wouldn't mind trying.
Okay. We usually like to ask first, just in case you're uncomfortable answering questions, that's totally fine. But if you're game for it, I'd like you to go first.
Okay, hold on. My cat just opened the door. Be right back. Okay.
My first question for you is, what would you try if you knew you could not fail in this new year? What would you do if you knew there was not a risk of you failing at it in this new coming up year?
I can't imagine that. I'm sorry. I can't imagine. I mean, I learned from failure. So something I wouldn't even be interested. So I don't know. I don't know how to begin
That's totally okay.
Okay.
Some of the best answers that people give during these table topics, which, by the way, table topics are meant to just be an expression of extemporaneous speech. You're just speaking on the fly, and you don't really prepare anything. So that's what this practice is for. But some of the best answers people give are when they disagree with the question that's been given to them, because it leads to a different perspective. And so I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to ask Lloyd, what would you like to be your biggest triumph by the end of the year?
That's an interesting question, Jacob. One I can think of is being alive at the end of the year. The reason I say that is that it could be that knowing me is dangerous to your health. I'm up to 9 people I know who have had very serious COVID infections. 5 of them are dead, and 2 more are probably not going to survive. So I'm kind of interested in staying alive, to tell you the truth. I think we've come to a point in this country where people are tired of the pandemic. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the disruption in my life, and I'm pretty sure every one of you is as well. But the virus doesn't much care whether or not we're tired of it. We might say, well, I'm done with COVID, but COVID may well not be done with us. So maintaining my health, staying alive is probably the number one thing. The number 2 thing is much more trivial, and that is I finished 3 paths, and I'd like to finish about 3 more if I could by the end of the year.
I think those are both really good goals to keep in mind, as trivial as the last one might seem. Barbara, my question is for you. What advice would you like to give yourself as you begin the new year, as if you're not yourself?
I'm not myself. What advice I would give myself or someone like me?
Yes.
Read more books. You can't read enough. And Lloyd is a perfect example of that. Actually, Jacob, I am not one that makes New Year's resolutions. I quit making New Year's resolutions several years ago. And like Lloyd alluded to, it just became increasingly harder through the pandemic, especially when we were all trying to make, what was it, banana bread and sourdough yeast? I can't remember. All those things that I did not partake in. In fact, I did the opposite. I actually quit reading for several months, just because I found it, even that, just too exhausting. So getting back into reading was my 2021 kind of New Year's challenge to myself. But what I would give my advice is, yes, read more and really, really expand your reading
Genres.
what you read. Yeah, not just
Yes.
genres, but what you read. Just really expand and try new authors, try little known authors.
That's a really good goal. I love that.
Thank you, Jacob.
My next question is for Kathleen. What would you be most happy about completing in this next year?
Thank you, Jacob. What would I be most happy about completing in the next year? I have a lot of things always that I'm working on. I'd like to complete a grant for my Rotary Club to help fund some improvements at the museum. I'd like to complete successfully and with verklempt emotion the first year of my husband's retirement. Today is day one.
Congratulations to that.
So far, so good. He's been very busy shoveling. I don't make New Year's resolutions. I'm a little bit like Barbara. I wish I could read more. I would like to put that on my list. I was a fabulous reader when I was young. I spent summers doing nothing but reading. A lot of them were Harlequin romances, which really skewed my concept of romance, but it was reading. And it was what was around the house. I don't read nearly as much anymore. I'm reading a book now by Mark Helprin. I think that's who it is. A Soldier of a Great War, which was recommended in something I read in the Washington Post. And it's one of those books that's this thick, and I have been reading it for months and months and months. And last night, I'm still in the last few pages, and I'm thinking, if you would just die, I know that's what's going to happen. I can't stay awake for all this rambling. Possibly the other thing that I need to accomplish this year is to have more patience with reading and all other things. Thank you, Jacob.
Oh, those are some lovely goals, especially patience. I can really appreciate that. Pat, you are my next questioner. What major indulgence are you willing to experience this year? What are you willing to indulge in insofar as you can?
My major indulgence would be traveling again. I'm about to approach my 82nd birthday. I was supposed to take a trip to Machu Picchu to celebrate my 80th birthday, which was the end of March in 2020. Obviously, that went down the drain. So I've always traveled. I used to write a travel column for the newspaper. The first freelance article I ever sold to a national magazine had to do with travel. So I would love to indulge myself in going somewhere. And my bucket list right now is going on a Viking River cruise. So I'd love to do a Viking River cruise, maybe in Portugal, some romantic part of Europe. That would be my indulgence, and I would have such joy to be able to do that. Thank you.
Of course, with wine and chocolate, of course, if you're going to be in Portugal, why not? Fabiola, my question to you is, what brings you the most joy, and how are you going to do more of that in this coming year?
Thank you for that question, Jacob. What brings me joy, and what will I do to bring more of that into my life this year? One thing that I have really embraced through our time with the pandemic is my family. And for me right now, I've really evaluated my goals in life and what I truly value. And my mission is to spend more time with my family and be present for them. And I would like to travel as Pat. And on my bucket list is also Machu Picchu. I want to go there, go hiking. And so I would like to be able to travel with my family, introduce new cultures and food and history, architecture to my son. He's going to be 16 next week. Scary. But start traveling with my son. And that's also been a new goal for my mom as well. And my mom actually, prior to the pandemic, had four trips planned to Australia, Japan, Singapore, and Jerusalem. And with the pandemic, all of that got messed up. But in May, she'll be going to Jerusalem to visit. So if I can be a part of that experience, I would love to be a part of that experience as well.
Wow.
Thank you for that question.
That would be fabulous, wouldn't it? Rob, I see that it's 6:16, and we have 3 people who have not answered questions. Should we cut it short quickly, or should we ask those questions? I do have some.
We can cut it short. Usually we do end about 6:15, so
Okay.
I think we're right on the money.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for answering all my questions. I'm so sorry I didn't get to some of you.
Thank you, Jacob. Those are wonderful questions and some wonderful answers. I would now like to turn the meeting back over to our general evaluator, Kathleen McNulty. Kathleen.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I will be utterly brief. I'm going to turn it over to Vicki so she can do the evaluation of the speech tonight done by Lloyd Smith. Vicki.
Thank you so much. The point of a speech evaluator is that these are just my opinions that I am giving to our speaker, and he can take what I give to him and use it or discard it. It is entirely up to him. As far as your speech, Lloyd, as always, you come up with incredible topics. When it was first presented that you were going to be speaking about religion, I would, those are one of those topics that we kind of try and stay away from in Toastmasters, let alone, around the dinner table at Christmas time. But you ventured on, and I was pleasantly surprised in that, of course, you're a master debater, and so you were able to take this topic and look at it at very different viewpoints and give us different objectives. And you obviously did your homework and researched this, because when you presented it, it was kind of difficult for the audience to come up with questions, because you didn't hit it at one point to where we could counter it. You kind of gave us an around of this is this, this is this, this is how this goes. And so it gave us this chance to, okay, now what are we going to ask? Because you gave us so many different viewpoints to begin with. But then you had some audience members who threw up some questions, and you were able to take those and answer them in a knowledgeable way. I never felt that you pushed the question away, deflected it. You came at it and answered those questions. And some of them became a little hard hitting, as Kathleen asked if you wanted. And, some of those got a little bit to where it could have been tension, but you handled those quite well. To challenge yourself, I think that you should maybe pick a topic that you haven't researched as much, maybe have more of a pointed view if you're going to do the questions and answers, so that we have a chance to perhaps throw our views at it more. That's just one way that I think you can challenge yourself. What do I want to see you keep doing? Wow, you just are chugging through these paths. You said you purchased number 7. I'm looking forward to seeing what that is, and I appreciate you being such a wonderful Toastmaster role model. Back to you.
Thank you, Madam Evaluator. am now going to move on, checking my handy dandy little list. We are now going to hear from our timer and the timer's report. Rob,
I'm having a verklempt moment.
shall we
I got-
skip you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. This evening, Lloyd, you did very well with the timing that you had asked for. Your speech was 5 minutes, 10 seconds. The Q&A, with the encouragement that you presented with everybody asking for questions, we were able to extend that to 14 minutes, 5 seconds. Table topics. Don, you were at 30 seconds. Lloyd, you were at 1:12. Barbara, you were 1:30. Kathleen, you were 1:52. Pat, you were exactly 1 minute. Fabiola, 1:37. And Vicky, you were at 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Wonderful job, everyone. You stayed within the time constraints. Excellent job. Back to you, Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Rob. Good to see the vegetables back. Let's move on and hear from our grammarian, Fabiola. Tell us how we did.
This evening, our word was verklempt, and it meant to overcome with emotion, to be overcome with emotion. And Rob used it twice, and Kathleen used it twice as well. As far as inappropriate grammatical uses, I did not identify any. And thoughts or quotes that stood out for me during Lloyd's speech was the split the difference and material disruption. Throughout our Q&As, Machu Picchu stood out for me once again, because that is something on my bucket list, and reading more suggested by Barbara. And that is something that is on my goal. And I have about 5 books over here on the side of my desk that I am trying to read more. When I was in school, I read because I had to, and it wasn't pleasant. Now that I'm no longer a student, now I'm actually enjoying and taking pleasure in reading. So that is my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Grammarian, for performing that role beautifully tonight. Appreciate it. Our last person we're going to hear from is the counter. Pat, fill us in.
All I can say is, wow. There were just 2 people who were pristine. They were Kathleen and Brian. Not a single filler word. The filler word of the evening was and and we had an avalanche of them. Barb had 3 and an and so. Vicky had 4 and a you know. Fabiola had 8 and an and so. Rob had 1. Jacob had 6 and 1 and so. Dawn had 2 and Lloyd had 12 4 buts, 1 and so, and then repeated words, violated, and I think it was materially. So the won the evening, the championship of the Let's get rid of those guys, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, for keeping a close eye on us. I've never been called pristine. I don't think. I've added it to my 2022 goal list and checked it off. I am going to evaluate our meeting overall. I have lots of positive things to say. First of all, here we are back on Zoom. Successfully on Zoom. We would rather not be here, but here we are. Most of our club members, many of them joined. We all logged in successfully. We can all remember the days when we couldn't figure out how to unmute ourselves, and those days are long gone. We started our meeting on time. Sorry, I should turn my phone off. We started our meeting on time. We're very likely to end it on time, as long as I don't take up too much of our time. I thought that the questions that came up after Lloyd's speech, and his speech was excellent. I really enjoyed it. Just a real good learning experience for those of us in the club to see someone perform a speech like that has just so much material, and then be able to answer questions like that. It's intimidating, but also invigorating. The questions that came up out of that, I thought that were fabulous. Another, a great part of our meeting tonight. Jacob, nice job introducing yourself as our table topics master. Very good job with that. And there was an there, Pat. Throwing that in, losing my pristine. One thing we might want to think about in terms of having guests, we might want to let a few other of our regular club members go first on table topics. So a guest kind of gets a sense of it. That might be a way to go in the future. That they have more of a roadmap then for what is expected. Dawn was a very good sport though, jumped right in. Thank you, Dawn, for doing that. An interesting thing I also noted was we had a very unusual word of the day. That is something that we might want to think as we go forward and we're picking out our word of the day. How do we get to a word that's challenging for people, but not so challenging that we're unlikely or less likely to use it? That's a tough one when you're in that role, just like being the table topics master and coming up with questions. It's a challenging role, and we all get a chance to do it. Those are my comments for tonight. I will close out and turn it back to the president or to Rob. The president. Okay.
I can take over. Thank you so much, Rob, for starting the meeting off for me. I was a little late due to my time it took me to get home. I also want to ask first, before I close the meeting, Lloyd or Rob, do we have any announcements to make?
The only thing that I wanted to reiterate, which I've mentioned before, if any of you are interested in a particular role, please let me know. I'm left to my own devices assigning roles for everybody. However, if you're really interested in doing a role, please let me know. If you have a particular theme or topic that you would like us to present as part of the table topics, please let me know. I'm running out of ideas. So I could really use everyone's help on both fronts. That's really the only thing I wanted to share today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Rob. Lloyd?
Let me add to that. Don't hesitate to ask for a role you've never done. Every single thing in Toastmasters is a learn by doing experience. So go for it.
That's good advice. Thank you for coming, John. I hope we see you next time, next Monday again. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We didn't have too many technical hiccups, so we're getting all used to it, unfortunately. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good week, everyone.